Can you stand by the bathroom wall so you don't ruin the wedding photos with your age?" The words dripped with false sweetness, but I felt the sting like a slap across the face. I smiled, politely, lifted my elegantly wrapped gift from the table, and walked straight out of the reception hall, leaving whispers, shocked faces, and a wedding I had helped plan for months behind me. That single moment didn't just break me. It awakened something far older, far quieter, far more dangerous than anger clarity. I'm Martha Williams, and at 64, I had spent 36 years raising a son I thought I knew, believing that unconditional love could survive anything. The wedding of my only child David to Brittany Peterson, a woman whose smile was as calculated as her designer handbag collection was supposed to be a day of joy. Instead, it became the day I realized just how expendable I had been in the eyes of the people I loved most. I had poured my savings into the wedding, subsisted on soup and crackers to stretch my social security, and still found myself standing in my modest dress, mocked subtly for daring to exist in their perfect photographs. 3 weeks before the wedding, life had taken an unexpected turn. I had been standing in Murphy's Corner Market at 9:30 p.m., counting out exact change for a can of soup and a package of saltines when Tommy Murphy, a kid who'd bagged groceries since high school, mentioned the lottery. "Jackpot's up to 62 million, he said casually. I almost laughed. How could such numbers exist when I was rationing pennies just to survive? Still something inside me, a combination of stubbornness, defiance, and desperation, pushed me forward. I handed over a $5 bill and asked for a quick pick. I folded the tiny paper ticket into my purse, alongside my grocery receipt, and walked home 45 minutes later, replaying all the small humiliations of my life, David's thoughtless remarks, Brittany's constant reminders of my inadequacy, and the emptiness left by Harold's passing 4 years earlier. That night, I sat alone with a cup of tea, carefully watching the lottery drawing. 7/14/21/35/47, Powerball 9. My ticket matched every number. $62 million. At first, disbelief gripped me. I double-checked, triple-checked, but there was no mistake. Suddenly, the world I had painstakingly endured rationing, walking everywhere, living quietly in an old studio apartment, was transformed. After settling taxes, I was left with $38 million. The first call, the first step toward reclaiming my life, was to open accounts, meet with financial advisors, and plan for the future I had always denied myself. The second step was strategic. I found an oceanfront property on Lighthouse Drive listed for $2,800,000. A sprawling contemporary house with floor-to-ceiling windows, wraparound decks, and private beach access. Beverly Henderson. The realtor raised an eyebrow at my cash offer, but one mention of my readiness to purchase immediately changed everything. I had also purchased a new Camry Essential Furniture and prepared a $3 million cashier's check for David and Brittany, wrapped beautifully in white paper with a silver bow. They believed this gift would solve all their financial problems, not knowing I planned to keep it locked away until they learned the consequences of their arrogance. The wedding day arrived and everything went according to plan, at least externally. I watched David exchange vows, Brittany's radiant smile still concealing the same calculating nature I had witnessed for years. I sat quietly at my table, perfectly dressed in navy blue with subtle beading hair, professionally styled shoes, new and polished, my gift waiting on the table. Then came the infamous moment. Brittany, with her flawless smile, asked me to stand by the bathroom wall for photographs. Too old, too visible, too inconvenient for social media perfection. I rose calmly, picked up my white box, and walked out. The reception continued behind me, oblivious to the quiet rebellion I had enacted. The taxi ride back to my studio apartment took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to reflect on 36 years of sacrifice, of patience, of unconditional love that had been repaid with indifference. Inside that small white box, they hadn't received a pair of crystal wine glasses. They hadn't received anything ordinary. Inside was proof that my life and my choices were no longer dictated by their expectations. The real gift, the one they would discover in due time, was a revelation of independence, clarity, and power they had never imagined I possessed. Sitting in Harold's old chair, the one piece of furniture I had kept, I sipped tea and savored the moment. $38 million. A beach house. A life finally my own. And for the first time in years, the sting of humiliation was replaced with the sweetness of liberation. David and Brittany's world, built on assumptions that I existed solely to serve them, was about to shift in ways neither could have anticipated. The morning after the wedding, my phone began buzzing incessantly. David's voice was first strained hesitant, as though he was measuring every word. "Mom, are you okay?" Brittany said. "You left early. Did something happen?" I took a slow sip of tea, glancing at the white box on my kitchen counter. "I'm better than I have been in years," I said calmly. "Go enjoy your honeymoon. Congratulations." The calls continued, escalating from polite concern to veiled pressure. Brittany herself called later, her voice honeyed but sharp beneath the surface. "Martha, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I didn't mean anything by asking you to stand by the bathroom wall." I'd already replayed her words enough times to remember the exact way she said them. "Brittany," I replied, "your words and actions have consequences. That gift on the table isn't what you think it is." She froze, trying to gauge my meaning, but I hung up before she could respond. I knew then that the moment of revelation, the one that would show them exactly how far I'd come, was coming. 3 weeks earlier, standing in that market with my $5 lottery ticket, I had made a choice. Life had always been about giving, about putting everyone else first. I had rationed my meals, walked miles in the cold, and watched David grow up, while quietly sacrificing my own comfort. Now I could do something entirely different, something for myself. That ticket, those numbers, and the $38 million in my account were proof that life could be rewritten with patient strategy and a bit of luck. I had also bought a downtown high-rise apartment in Ocean View Towers, a sleek 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor with harbor views and a modern kitchen. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of independence. David and Brittany believed I was living the same modest life, unaware that my new reality would completely shift the balance in our relationship. The real surprise, the beach house and the $3 million check, remained in the white box. They expected ordinary generosity. What they would get instead was a lesson in respect boundaries and the consequences of underestimating someone. Sunday afternoon, the gift opening tradition at David and Brittany's rental house began. Friends and family lingered in the living room, surrounded by wrapping paper and ribbons. I had brought a smaller box, containing a simple key and a folded note, enough to pique their curiosity, but not yet reveal the full extent of my plans. David, puzzled, unfolded the note and read the address to my downtown apartment. Brittany's face flickered with surprise and confusion. They were trying to map the implications to calculate what this meant in terms of access to me, my resources, my life. I sipped my tea and watched quietly, letting the discomfort simmer. The reactions were telling. David's initial confusion shifted to concern then calculation, while Brittany's polite facade cracked at the edges. They hadn't expected me to have a life beyond their needs, beyond their expectations, beyond their assumptions of control. They began asking questions, probing carefully, about costs, financial decisions, and planning. I answered minimally, letting them draw their own conclusions, while savoring the subtle shift in power. Their dependence, once absolute, was now tempered by curiosity, concern, and a touch of fear. For the next week, I lived in quiet luxury. Mornings, on the wraparound deck of my new beach house, Listening to the waves became sacred. I strolled along the private beach, sipped wine that cost more than their monthly rent, and reveled in the freedom to make choices solely for myself. I maintained minimal contact with David and Brittany, only answering necessary calls, always in control of the timing and content. Their panic grew with each unanswered message. Finally, a Tuesday morning arrived when a private investigator's report came through. I had hired Rebecca Chen shortly after Brittany's initial visit, partly to protect myself and partly out of curiosity. The report confirmed what I suspected. David and Brittany had indeed hired someone to track my financial activity. They discovered the downtown apartment, the car, and my furniture upgrades, but not the lottery ticket or the beach house. Even more revealing were the details about their own finances: credit card debt, student loans, a mortgage that consumed nearly half of David's income. They had been counting on me, expecting me to remain the obedient provider, the invisible bank account. By now, calls and texts were relentless. David's voice on the line had grown weary, strained with subtle pleading. "Mom, we need to talk. This sudden change in your life, it's concerning. Are you sure you've thought this through?" I smiled at the thought of him worrying more about his inheritance than my well-being. "Yes, David," I replied. "I've thought this through. Carefully. Every detail." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. They knew the game had changed. They didn't yet know the full extent, but they sensed the shift in power, the independence that no amount of pleading or manipulation could undo. That week, Brittany tried visiting my downtown apartment under the guise of apology. She waited hours in the lobby, perfectly aware I wasn't home. Each visit, each call, each message was a measure of desperation, a subtle acknowledgement that their assumptions about me were entirely incorrect. I let them reach that conclusion on their own, knowing that the eventual revelation, the beach house, the check, the lesson in respect would hit harder than any confrontation I could stage. The morning of the big reveal arrived a Saturday, wrapped in calm sunlight and the scent of the Atlantic air. I had arranged for everything to be finalized that week: the beach house closing, the $3 million cashier's check, and the quiet preparation for the moment when David and Brittany would finally see the consequences of their behavior. Standing on my wraparound deck, the waves sparkling below, I felt a sense of anticipation that hadn't existed in decades. This was no longer about proving a point. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my choices. I had kept the beach house purchase a secret, not out of malice, but because it was mine to enjoy. I had also intentionally maintained the illusion of my modest downtown apartment, letting David and Brittany assume I was still living a restrained, predictable life. Every call they made, every message they sent, now carried a subtle tension I had never experienced in our relationship before. They didn't yet know how much I had won, nor how far I had already gone to secure my independence. They only sensed that their assumptions about me were no longer valid. Sunday afternoon, as they gathered to open gifts at their rental home, I arrived with a small, deceptively simple box. The crystal wine glasses were already opened and admired their shiny surfaces reflecting the room's light, but the key and note I placed inside my smaller box were meant to pique curiosity and create anticipation. David, with his polite eagerness, unfolded the paper, revealing the address of my downtown apartment. His eyebrows rose in mild surprise. Brittany followed suit, eyes narrowing as she tried to interpret the meaning behind this seemingly ordinary gesture. The reactions were subtle but telling. They were beginning to understand that my life was no longer centered around them. "Mom, what is this for?" David asked, voice cautious. "It's a place you might like to visit sometime," I said, lightly smiling to myself. Their expressions shifted subtly, a mixture of confusion and realization. The room was filled with the tension of unspoken questions. They were starting to calculate, trying to figure out my intentions. Yet, unaware of the full picture. I let the silence stretch, letting their discomfort build naturally. Their reliance on me for guidance, finances, and approval had been absolute, and now that foundation had begun to crumble. Over the next few days, I watched them grapple with their own assumptions. David called to discuss the apartment. Brittany sent messages attempting reconciliation, and both tried to navigate a world in which I had agency independent of them. Their once comfortable position, expecting me to sacrifice, to provide, to exist only to serve their convenience, was eroding. I did not respond immediately, letting the tension simmer, each unanswered message reinforcing the lesson they had long ignored. Respect is earned, not assumed. Then came the private investigator's report delivered meticulously by courier. I had hired Rebecca Chen to confirm suspicions and protect my privacy, but the findings went beyond what I anticipated. David and Brittany had indeed hired an investigator to track my finances. They discovered the downtown apartment, the car, and the furniture, but not the beach house or the lottery ticket. They were partially aware, which explained the escalating calls, but they had not yet grasped the full magnitude of the situation. Even more telling were the details about their own financial instability, debts, mortgages, and spending patterns that relied in part on my anticipated compliance and generosity. Their sense of entitlement, so quietly cultivated over years, had been exposed. Finally, the moment came. At 9 a.m., I let the phone ring 4 times before answering. David's voice was hollow, defeated. "Mom, we found out about the beach house. Please, can we just talk?" I sipped my coffee standing on my deck with the sun glinting off the waves. "David, you may come visit, but you will need an invitation. People who treat me as a convenience rather than family do not gain automatic access." Silence. Their panic was audible even over the line. "Mom, we've made mistakes," David said, finally voice trembling. "Brittany and I, we didn't realize how we've been acting. Can we fix this?" I allowed myself a brief, indulgent smile. "You may have learned some lessons," I said, "but this isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. I've spent decades putting everyone else first, and now I'm choosing myself." Brittany's voice interjected, desperate yet polished. "Martha, we just want to understand. Please talk to us." I didn't need to explain further. My life, my choices, my wealth, all of it spoke for itself. The beach house, the downtown apartment, the independence I had carved from decades of constraint. These were lessons in self-respect and boundaries. I had shown them that age does not diminish value, and that unconditional giving is not an obligation. Their attempts to manipulate, to guilt, to control had failed. For the first time, they were seeing me as a person with agency rather than a shadow of expectation. In the days that followed, the calls grew less frequent. David attempted genuine conversations about my health, well-being, and plans, but they were measured careful. Brittany's attempts at apologies became less frequent, less performative. I maintained boundaries, only engaging on my terms, fully aware that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. The final act of revelation, the beach house, the $3 million check, remained my secret weapon, a reserve of power they would eventually understand, but not control. The first week in my beach house was surreal. The sun rose over a private stretch of sand dolphins, leapt through the surf, and I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below as I sipped coffee on the teak deck. This was freedom, the kind of freedom that came not from money alone, but from breaking the invisible chains of expectation that had bound me to my son and his wife for decades. I moved slowly through the spacious rooms, unpacking only what I truly wanted: photographs of my late husband, a few cherished mementos from my mother, and the quiet luxury of a life chosen entirely for myself. Every choice, every possession was a statement: Martha Williams would no longer be anyone's secondary character. David and Brittany's reactions were delayed but inevitable. The calls had started subtly casual. Inquiries, questions disguised as concern thinly veiled, attempts to gauge my day-to-day life. "Mom, we were wondering how your move went," David said, one morning, voice neutral. "Everything's perfect," I replied, watching a yacht glide across the horizon. "I've arranged things exactly as I want them. How are things with the new mortgage?" I let my question hang in the air. His sigh spoke volumes. They realized now that their assumptions, my compliance, my dependence, my invisibility, were no longer valid. Brittany tried the direct approach next, arriving at my downtown apartment with a tray of cookies she claimed to have baked herself. I let her in, but only out of polite curiosity. She scanned the apartment quickly, eyes flicking over the furniture upgrades and the subtle signs of my improved lifestyle. Her practiced charm was present, but the strain beneath it was undeniable. "Martha, I really am sorry for the misunderstanding at the wedding," she said, voice measured carefully, modulated. I listened politely, sipping tea, knowing that the apology was genuine enough to satisfy public appearance, but insufficient to mask the motives behind it. "I accept your apology, Brittany," I said. "But understand this, your apology doesn't erase the choices you made, nor does it grant you automatic access to my life or resources." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She realized, as David had, that the balance of power had shifted. I had money, yes, but more importantly, I had clarity, independence, and boundaries. They were powerless to dictate my behavior now. The next few days were filled with calculated restraint on my part. I explored the coastline, walked along the harbor promenade, read books I had long postponed, and let the solitude remind me of a truth I had learned late. Being alone does not equate to loneliness. My apartment in the city served as a decoy for David and Brittany's curiosity. The beach house remained a private sanctuary, a place where I could relish in the rewards of my decades-long perseverance and sacrifice. The crystal wine glasses, once a nearly crippling expense, now seemed trivial in comparison to the wealth and independence I had secured. 2 weeks later, the final act of revelation unfolded. The deed to the beach house, wrapped in the familiar white paper with a silver ribbon, remained unopened in my bedroom closet. David and Brittany still believed I had been generous, yet financially constrained, still imagined the gift of the apartment as my only statement of goodwill. They had no idea of the $3 million check, waiting alongside the deed, an extraordinary gift meticulously prepared that would never reach their hands. The irony was exquisite. Their entitlement, carefully nurtured over years, collided with reality, and I watched silently from my deck as the lesson sank in. Their panic and calculation were almost palpable when news of my private beach house filtered back through mutual acquaintances. The questions became more pointed, the concern more urgent, each inquiry revealing the depth of their previous assumption that I was an instrument for their financial security, not a person with autonomy. I responded sparingly, never confirming the details, letting their imaginations run wild. They realized that no matter how they had tried to manipulate me, the ultimate control rested with me. It was at that moment, standing on the sun-warmed teak deck, that I truly understood the significance of my choices. Age had not diminished my power, nor had decades of servitude erased my worth. Winning the lottery had been transformative, yes, but the real transformation had been internal, a complete reclamation of self-respect and independence. David and Brittany could no longer treat me as expendable, invisible, or merely an ATM with legs. They were forced finally to recognize me as Martha Williams, a woman capable of shaping her destiny and enjoying the rewards of a lifetime of patience and perseverance. The final confrontation, though unspoken, was complete. I had achieved what I had set out to do. I had reclaimed my agency, taught valuable lessons without malice, and secured a life that was mine in every sense. David and Brittany's guilt calculation and concern were byproducts of their own choices, a mirror reflecting how far they had taken their assumptions for granted. They would come to terms with it, but on my timeline and my terms, and never with entitlement, dictating the relationship again. I stood at the edge of the deck that evening watching the sun sink behind the Atlantic waves. The water glistened like liquid gold, and for the first time in decades I felt completely unbound. The life I had envisioned for myself, a life of dignity, autonomy, and quiet luxury, was finally mine. Age sacrifice and years of being undervalued were no longer obstacles. They had been catalysts. I had learned in the most dramatic way possible that the best power does not come from wealth alone, but from the clarity and courage to claim it. The days following the revelation were peaceful, almost luxurious in their simplicity. I woke each morning to the sound of waves and the scent of salt air, and for the first time in decades, my choices were my own. I decorated the beach house with furniture and art that pleased me, arranged my books and mementos exactly how I wanted, and filled my kitchen with ingredients I actually enjoyed cooking with, not just whatever was affordable. The freedom to live without financial or familial constraints felt intoxicating, yet grounding, as if I had finally stepped into a life I had earned through patience, sacrifice, and resilience. David and Brittany continued their attempts to reach me. Calls, texts, even messages through mutual friends, all laced with urgency, apology, or subtle manipulation. I read each one carefully, savoring the irony of their desperation. They had spent years treating me as an afterthought, measuring my value only in terms of what I could provide. Yet now, they realized that the tables had turned. But I did not respond immediately. There was no need for confrontation or explanation. This was not about revenge. It was about asserting boundaries, about showing them that respect is earned, not demanded by birthright. One afternoon, I received a hand-delivered letter from Brittany. The envelope was heavy, expensive looking, but the contents betrayed her anxiety, a long, carefully worded apology, an acknowledgement of her and David's manipulations, and a tentative request for reconciliation. I read it slowly, savoring each sentence before placing it on my coffee table. I would respond on my terms in my time with dignity and tact. This was the lesson I wanted to teach them quietly but unmistakably. The life you try to control is the one you must respect, not exploit. Weeks passed, and I allowed myself the indulgence of solitude. I explored the coastline, joined local book clubs and walking groups, and found joy in discovering friends and companions outside the narrow confines of family expectations. Every day I reveled in the reality that I could live for myself, plan for my future, and enjoy the fruits of my hard work without guilt. The beach house became more than a home. It was a symbol of autonomy, an emblem of the life I had longed for and now fully embraced. One morning I received a call from David. His voice was hesitant, tinged with genuine concern rather than calculation. "Mom, I know we've pushed too hard and said too little," he began. I just wanted to know if you're okay, if we can talk." I considered his words carefully. There was no entitlement in his tone, no expectation of my resources or compliance, just an acknowledgement of past mistakes and a desire for connection. I smiled quietly to myself. Perhaps he had finally learned something about boundaries and respect. "Yes, David," I replied, calm and measured. "I'm doing more than okay. I'm thriving, and if you truly want a relationship with me, it cannot be based on what I can give you financially. It has to be based on mutual respect and care." There was silence, and I imagined the weight of understanding settling in. "I understand," he said finally softly. I really do. Brittany called later that evening, her voice sincere, apologetic, stripped of pretense. Martha, I see now how wrong I was, not just at the wedding, but over the years. I hope we can find a way to rebuild trust. I let her words wash over me. This time the power dynamic had shifted. I could forgive or not. I could reconnect or not. The choice was entirely mine. We'll see, Brittany, I said gently but firmly. Time will tell. Sitting on my deck that night, watching the sun dip below the horizon and illuminate the ocean in a cascade of gold and orange, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Winning the lottery had provided the means, yes, but the real victory was clarity. I had learned that age, sacrifice, and appearances are not measures of worth. Respect must be demanded through action and boundaries, not assumed through familial ties. My autonomy, my joy, my dignity, they were mine to protect and nurture. In the end, it wasn't revenge that made me powerful. It was the decision to prioritize myself, to stand firm in the face of manipulation, and to claim a life I had earned. David and Brittany would learn eventually that love and respect are earned, not taken. And I would continue to live fully, freely, and unapologetically, savoring every sunrise and every wave along my private beach. If there's one lesson I hope you take away from my story, it's this. Your worth is never measured by how others treat you or what they expect from you. True power lies in clarity, self-respect, and the courage to choose your own path regardless of age expectation or family pressure. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the life you deserve. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Tell me your thoughts and share your own experiences. Your voice matters, and your story could inspire someone else to reclaim their power and dignity.